So I'm here today with Tom Mars. He's been working in a variety of programming projects for a long, long time, but lately he's been working with JSON, and it's growing. It used to just be this little excerpt from JavaScript, the JavaScript object notation. You came on it at a time when it was really starting to expand. How's that looked?
Wow, it's taken off. I've noticed that it works in just about every platform. So all you really have to do is just pick your language du jour, whatever you're happy with, and there is a library waiting for you with JSON. And then I noticed that, okay, we moved beyond just being able to parse and be able to emit JSON from our favorite programming language to where it became the language of the web, the language of RESTful web services.
So it seems to be moving kind of beyond the library state. Originally, it was just I will send it here, I don't have to think about the object conversions. But as people are building bigger RESTful systems, as people are sending more and different kinds of data, it seems to be developing more of a support family. It used to be the secret sauce, the invisible stuff.
Right.
But now it's climbing out.
Definitely. I mean, it's becoming really mainstream. You pretty much, everybody's got some kind of style guide going out there. You can look at it. Most major companies that do APIs, and they're always talking about how they do JSON in their APIs and how they structure it. And you're seeing all kinds of tools and workflows, and that's some of the stuff that I talk about here, is just how to design your JSON data better using schema, how to be able to handle it better when you're calling APIs through searching for just pieces of the data or just transforming it, only taking out the pieces that you want. So there's all kinds. So it's still API, it's libraries, but it's libraries with a real purpose other than just parsing and emitting.
It seems to be finding a bit of a life beyond the transmission wire as well. People are keeping it around for a while and storing it, searching it.
Oh, absolutely, of course. I mean, all the major NoSQL databases have some play with that. I mean, not Node. I'm drawing a blank. MongoDB, of course. CouchDB, they all handle that. They process it very well. And I'm noticing, too, that in a lot of the main programming languages, the systems, like, for example, Node.js, they use a file called package.json to go create their projects. So JSON is being now used for configuration. So that's even replacing XML there. And there's a place called schemasstore.org or .com that will let you just browse schemas that are out there, including one for package.json. So it's being used more and more often just on disk for configuration as well. And I'm also noticing that I've seen some people using JSON for logging too. So it's going into log files.
Yes. They're using pieces, and it ties into that. We want to have data structured tightly enough that we can manage it, but loosely enough that we can get to it with other tools.
Right. Yeah, so there's all kinds of tools that can manipulate it. And one thing I forgot to add in before was just the fact that it's not just for APIs. I'm seeing JSON as a messaging format, like if you're using something like Kafka or other types of messaging systems, that's usually what you're using as your wire over the wire as well between systems. So you can have RESTful messaging, if you can think of it that way, with JSON. It's really about not just talking about the data, but also the things that you can do with the data. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of this is the hypertext as engine of application state, where you're finding ways to shorten the data. Like, for example, you don't want a huge hierarchy all the time of data, depending what you're trying to do. Like, let's say you have an order with an order line item and other hierarchical dependencies. You don't want deep trees. A lot of times people just want to say, here's my main data structure, and then here's links off to the other pieces through API, just URIs to the other APIs. But that all depends on what you're trying to do. It's contextual. Right. Sometimes you're trying to grab huge data. You have to if you're mobile. You don't want a chatty protocol. But other times you want somewhat chatty because you don't want everything. So JSON is used differently depending on the context. It's architecture as well as just data.
Right. You can choose your granularity as fits what you need to do.
Right.
You were talking about schemas and you're talking about schemas in design, and you're talking about searching for schemas. What does JSON design look like?
JSON design.
Who's doing it? How is it?
I'm kind of pioneering that right now. I don't know if it's going to take off or not, but I use different types of tools. There's one tool I started using a few years ago with one of my teams. It's called JSON Pad, and it's going Well, it's going away only because Google Code is starting to go away. That's folding because of GitHub. So what I did to preserve the code base is I put it onto my own, I forked it over onto GitHub. But I want to keep that, but what it does is it's UML style modeling.
Okay.
And it's like it. You can do keys, you can do arrays, you can do objects. So it's logical. So there's no JSON directly, but then you hit a button and then whoosh, it generates JSON. So I don't have to, so I use that for modeling. And I'll use that to kind of work with people that are consuming my API to look at the data. And I do things like that just because JSON itself, especially with large documents, can be very tedious to type. You want to make sure that it's valid. And JSON-Pad will always emit valid JSON. And usually I'll take some of that to JSON-Lint to make sure it's going to be okay. Because you always want to make sure when you're working with this stuff that it's always valid. Because the minute it goes invalid, well, you're done. You're finished.
Got to keep it clean.
Exactly. And then the other things I will do is once I'm satisfied with the data, I'll then take it to a generator. There's a thing called JSON generator that takes on one. It's a website, but you can take just a very simple JavaScript object, just an object literal, that's a pattern. So it will generate GUIDs, IDs, people's first name and last name. It's a faker. And you get it to what you want, and you can tell it to generate N records.
Okay.
So off of that, I click the button, generates a lot of JSON for me, and I've got at least the beginnings of what the data set could look like after I've interviewed my potential customers. And from there, I'll go and I can I can create a very simple API. And that can happen very simply. I don't have to write any code to do a test API. I started with Firebase. I don't know if you've heard of that, but you can take the JSON file I just talked about, and I can roll that into my Firebase account, and boom, I have an API that looks, acts, and smells like an API. It's addressable on the web, and then all of a sudden I can start calling it. That's one way, but there's about 10 to 15 other tools I can use that are local that I can run on my box. So there's no internet connection, which is great. Like when you're here at a conference, you don't have great internet connectivity. And I used some of that a couple days ago on my talk. I had a little tool called Json Server that I could run from the command line. It takes in a file, and poof, in 2 seconds you got something listening out on port 5000. It's just it's web addressable, and then I can start calling it just with an HTTP call. And that's powerful because what that does is that lets the UI team, anybody consuming your service, they've got something they can touch, taste, and feel, and you can get some burn-in and some advice on what your API should look like. You can refine the model very quickly, very quick iteration. You can go through what I just described, the first cut, in about 30 minutes or less. And then you can refine the model very, very quickly, very rapid prototyping. Meanwhile, you guys on the back end can start to work on it. And I did this at a hackathon, and we were able to spin this up pretty quickly. Our UI people, both mobile, web people, were able to call this dummy API, this fake API, and get their UI working. And on the back end, our API developers were able to put this together. It worked beautifully, and then they just changed the URI address, and it just worked without missing a beat. It worked seamlessly. So I vetted this on these people at the hackathon, and it worked. I
like just change the URL, and you get a different thing. That's great.
That's it.
That's the way the web is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be that way. So I use JSON schema to drive API design. It's a little bit of a different approach, but that's my style that I do. And I'm hoping some of that can catch on as I'm starting to write, as I'm starting to speak more about it. I hope more people will use the tools that are already available. The JSON community has done so much, but the thing is, each team that did all this stuff doesn't know about the other teams, and nobody knows about them. So really, all I'm doing is trying to tell people about what's out there, to use what they've done, and to really just appreciate what's there for free.
Bring it together,
and just talk about the great work that the JSON community is doing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. May JSON have a long and vibrant career.
Yes.
Thank you.